This is The Gala Show. I'm your reporter on the beat, Gala Avery. On this episode, you may know my guest by his alias Worm Miller, or perhaps as one of the hosts of the podcast Best Movies Never Made, the man who brought you Golan the Insatiable, or maybe even that guy who hosts the LA-based horror screenings Friday Night Frights. But here on The Gala Show, I know him as one of the writers of my favorite movie of 2020 and my favorite movie of 2022, Josh Miller. Hey, Josh.
Hello.
And for those of you that don't get it, yes, Sonic and Sonic 2 are my favorite movies of those years, just so we make that clear, if I haven't made that clear enough already in my life. So before we bring up the topic for today, I have a question for you. You and I have chatted a little bit about the difficulties and nuances of adaptations. You clearly adapted the Sonic movies for the screen, and my father adapted Silent Hill for the screen, both video game adaptations. Also, we're joined by
My cat is currently attacking my feet.
We're joined by his cat, which I love. But you adapted Sonic for the screen, and my dad adapted Silent Hill. So I'm dying to know, if you could adapt any original material for the screen, be it a video game franchise or a book series you love, because I know you're in a book club, or even an album, which one would you choose and why?
It's funny, something that my writing partner, Pat, and I talk about a lot, because obviously our agents and managers and people are always like, think of some books you want to adapt. But for whatever reason, we didn't really grow up wanting to adapt the things that we loved, other than the easy answer for me is Clive Barker's The Thief of Always. I don't know what it was about that book, but I've always wanted to do an adaptation, and I still do, but I also know that it's kind of a rights nightmare, because so many different people have been trying since the 90s to adapt it. And as to why, because I think it's kind of, it's as far as I know, it's Clive Barker's only like kids book, which is funny because if you read it, it's probably most parents would think it's very inappropriate for children. But to me, it's kind of got that nice cross of 80s Amblin entertainment, you know, kid going on an adventure, but it's Clive Barker, so it gets really dark and fucked up.
So it's like dark children's.
Yes.
Wow, that'd be really fun, actually. Okay, I kind of want that to happen now. Like, I'm kind of waiting.
Well, I'm putting it out there.
Yeah, you're putting it out there. If anyone can, like, figure out the rights to that, call us. Yeah. Side question, what book is your book club covering?
Yes, I'm currently wearing my book club shirt. Losers Book Club. We just read Adam Caesar's Clown in a Cornfield.
That sounds also equally scary. That's like two things I don't want to have happen: a clown and a cornfield, and me inside of it. So
it's got a great cover. It's been on my list for a while. I think in part just without even knowing what the plot was.
Do you guys get together like once a month, or like?
We do it once a month, and we try to get the author if we can, and he's joining us on Zoom today.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, great. So.
And I liked the book. I should say.
Good. It's a good thing that you didn't like the book. It's like, I hated this book. This clown in a cornfield. Now, as always, my guest gets to bring their topic to the mic. Josh, why don't you tell us what your topic is and why you decided to choose it?
The topic is being a movie kid, and kind of what I mean by that is I think anyone who's a movie super nerd has that moment, probably different ages for different people, but that moment where you start to realize that you like movies more than all your friends and family.
I had that moment.
And just kind of like what that means then for the rest of your life. And I think why, when you asked me to be on the podcast, that was what jumped to mind, is I was just back home in Minnesota for a 20th anniversary of, I guess technically be considered my first movie, Hey, Stop Stabbing Me.
Which I got to see at Be Kind Video,
yeah,
actually.
Was awesome.
That was really, I loved it.
And I think just, you know, when you're home, you start to think about childhood and stuff. And we had, like, the cast was there, and there's people I've known, some of them since junior high, and just kind of made me think back to all our old movie watching days. And now it's time for a commercial break. And we're back.
Okay, great. So you heard it here first, folks. We are going to be talking about what it's like to be a movie kid growing up. I have 30 minutes on the clock, and our time starts now.
And go.
And go. So where did you grow up, for those that don't know?
I grew up in a couple different suburbs of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Probably the one that I lived the longest is called Bloomington, which is where the Mall of America is.
Yeah.
And I always say anyone who's had a like layover in Minneapolis when flying to New York or Toronto or wherever, you've probably been in my suburb then, because that's where the airport is.
So how do you feel growing up in Minneapolis as a movie kid affected you? Because I'm sure it's different than my experience growing up here in LA as a movie kid.
Well, Minneapolis itself is very cool. For people who don't know it, I always kind of compare it to Austin or Portland,
really?
Oregon, as far as really cool artsy towns in a state that you otherwise might not associate with that kind of vibe. But I don't know if it still does. When I was growing up, Minneapolis had the largest number of theater, meaning like plays, not movie theater, but the most like theater seats per capita of any city in the country. So it's just a very artsy place. So I think if you grow up in Minneapolis, it's a little different. Growing up in the suburbs, I think a lot of people, I consider myself lucky to grow up in the video store era as a kid. And we had some cool video stores, but at the same time, we didn't have like out here Cinephile or Vidiots or places like
video
that.
archives.
Or video archives, exactly. We didn't have these kind of deep cut, heavily archived places. It was great to grow up prior to the domination of Blockbuster and Hollywood Video. So it was places that there was a person whose job was trying to pick interesting stuff. And, I was very happy looking back to have cool horror sections in those places. But my greater point was it didn't feel like there was a lot of exposure to older movies or weirder movies. We didn't have any rep theaters.
Okay.
There were a few downtown that I discovered when I was going to the University of Minnesota. But even then, now I also think we're living through a real rep theater boom now in LA.
For sure. I mean, and not only the rep theaters, but also we have all of the the micro cinemas popping up too, which is like Whammy and Be Kind Video. It's it's really weird because you can just go see anything at any given
It's crazy.
Night. It's awesome.
I still remember the first time I even discovered a rep midnight screening at a place called Uptown in Minneapolis, which is like a cool hipster neighborhood in Minneapolis. And I was just like, wow, they're showing Gremlins at midnight. This is crazy. And
now that's an average Tuesday in LA.
Totally. If anything, you're just like, oh my God, they're showing Gremlins again? Show something else, you guys. Long way of answering that. It didn't feel like there was a lot of exposure. I didn't know it at the time. It's now just looking back. But the other weird thing is in the 90s, Minnesota briefly had a really good tax incentive. Oh. And Minnesota is not a typical place that movies were ever typically shot. And all of a sudden they were shooting movies there, which seemed really cool. That was when they did Mallrats, Mighty Ducks.
Did you go visit the sets of those? Or?
So my specific suburb was my high school, Jefferson in Bloomington, basically became the evil school in a hockey movie, a high school hockey movie that the Mighty Ducks would have to play. We would have been the evil school that was the state champ every year. So people hated us. So everyone in my town, this is when I was in junior high, not everyone, all the hockey players ended up being stunt doubles or, non-dialogue skating characters in that movie, which felt very exciting. The only one I went to visit, because usually they would shoot in weird places. I don't even know where they shot Grumpy Old Men, but that was out somewhere more in the country. But I went to visit Jingle All the Way when they shot at the Mall of America. And it's still one of my favorite, because it was, even though they shot a bunch of movies and it didn't feel like a bunch. It's only looking back that I was like, that was actually a lot of movies they shot in Minneapolis during that time. But one of my favorite memories was going there, and my friends and I got to see Arnold Schwarzenegger wrestling with his stunt double between takes, because they were just buddies, so they were horsing around, and they were dressed exactly the same.
Oh my gosh, so it's like that Spider-Man meme where
totally.
It's they're pointing at each other.
And we were 3 stories up, so it was kind of wait, which one is Arnold?
It's so funny, because I did grow up in LA, but I grew up mostly in Ojai, which it's like 2 hours north of LA.
Oh, my wife and I love Ojai.
Yeah, so I grew up in Ojai, went to like Ojai Valley School, and they filmed Easy A there. And I remember that summer I was
I didn't know that.
Yeah, they filmed Easy A there. The credit sequence is actually on my street, like where I lived. But I remember when they filmed it, I was in like theater camp. I guess I was like doing Barnum that year. That's the kid I was. And everyone's like, let's go watch them film Easy A. And I'm like, I don't need to do that. But I remember it's like, it was such a huge deal to have that movie being shot. Like Amanda Bynes was there and like Emma Stone. It was amazing. So I know what that feels like. Definitely being a kid and also being like a movie geek kid and having the movie come to town.
Oh, totally. I mean, the only movie I was ever an extra in is that now completely forgotten Josh Hartnett movie called Here on Earth that Lily Sobieski was in, and that shot in Minnesota.
Are you able to find yourself in the background?
Yeah, if you want. It's actually very easy for people who want to randomly check it out because my writing partner and I are in like the first 2 minutes, so you don't even have to watch the whole movie.
So when did you first get like interested in movies? Like what was it that made you want to do it?
It's funny because it was so long ago, I don't even really remember. I mean, the thing I do remember is I initially wanted to do like comic books and be an animator, and that started so early that I honestly can't tell you what I liked about it.
That's exactly like my dad, actually.
Yeah.
Like he originally wanted to do cartooning and animation, and then he just found like it was easier to like
exactly
Super 8 stuff. And
I think the big turning point was my family got a camcorder when I was in 3rd grade, and there was like a button. There was a time lapse button. It was called, but it was funny because the number of frames it would shoot was so long that it barely looked animated, but I would still do animation. And then at some point, I'm sure with your dad, same thing, you're like, well, that took me like a week to do this 5-minute thing that's not even very good. I could just have my friends do this and we could knock it out in an hour.
Yeah, and also it's like, and then you start writing because like my dad always says, he began writing because it was cheaper than having someone else write for him. So he's like, I'm just going to start writing, and then you just keep doing it. But was there like a certain like movie or experience that was just like, I'm in, or was it that camcorder?
As far as like wanting to make movies, that was definitely it. I always credit, as far as the things that made me just obsessed with fiction storytelling, Dark Crystal was definitely one, because I always liked the Muppets. Obviously, all kids did.
Scary.
Well, now you understand why I like Thief of Always.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there was something where that was one of the earliest movies I remember really thinking, even as a kid, because I knew they were all puppets. Mm-hmm. And it was weird to realize, because the Muppet movies all have humans in them.
Yeah.
And the Muppets look like puppets. And I think I liked the Muppets because my mom, who was a flight attendant, but one of her hobbies was she volunteered for a puppet theater in Minneapolis. So we always had weird puppets lurking around our house.
It's kind of creepy.
It was. But I think it was the idea that I really thought about the fact that everything in this movie is fake. Because, in the Muppet movie, they're talking to celebrities and, Charles Durning, and they're out in the real world because that's how the Muppets worked. And, I mean, now looking back, I'm like, well, most of that was sets. But when you're a kid,
when you're a kid, it's the real
they're
world.
They're in a bar. They just went to a bar. They didn't build that bar. But Dark Crystal, I was like, no, every single part of this movie's fake.
Yeah, it's handmade.
It's all handmade. It's all these insane puppets, and just trying to be like, is there a person in that suit? Because as a kid you'd hear how Jabba the Hutt had like 4 people inside and Return of the Jedi and stuff. So I think that was definitely a mental turning point in starting to really think about the fact that none of this was real and like what that meant. And Sam Raimi, I think, was a big director for me in the same way that his camera was so spastic that, where someone like Clint Eastwood or, Altman, it's like they don't want you to think about the fact that there's a camera in the room. He's like, no, you can't ignore my camera because I'm running across the room and jamming it in people's faces and stuff. So I think that all the first stuff I directed was very much a Sam Raimi knockoff.
And it sounds also like when we were talking about like, hey, stop stabbing me, that you kind of found other people that were really interested in these same things at a young age, like middle school and stuff like that. It's like you weren't alone, right?
No. And yes, first kind of we teed it up of that moment when you realize that you're more into movies than your friends, which is oddly enough, that happened to me even moving out LA, where all of a sudden I met all the people across the country who moved out here because they were movie nerds. And then at some point I was like, oh my God, how am I even bigger movie nerd than you guys? But yeah, it was funny because none of my friends, obviously other than a guy who became my writing partner, pretty much none of my other friends wanted to pursue anything creative as a career, or even if they kind of did for whatever reason, I don't want to say they chickened out, but like they didn't go to film school.
It takes a lot of like you have to keep going because you get said no a lot, and it's really easy just to give up and just to say, okay, I'm gonna go do something else. Then I'm just gonna love movies, because there's people can also like love movies and not work in them.
Yeah.
Which is a really big thing that people need to understand. Like, you don't have to work in them. You can also just like love them and champion them.
And I mean, to close out the question about my movie group, but then I do want to say something about that. It was just my friends. I think, who doesn't want to make a movie is the simple thing. So the fact that I was doing it was a great outlet for all my friends. Other people get together to play basketball or, touch football or whatever, or go bowling. We would make these silly movies in junior high and high school and then
and then
college.
And then even now.
Yes.
You're living the dream. That's so great. Do you think that, okay, I always think about this because I grew up in like the beginning of the internet age, and it's like maybe you don't have people around you that like movies. I was alone. Like, I was the only one out of my friends who even liked movies. My other friends don't. And even now I have movie friends, but barely. Do you think the internet's made it easier for people to find their tribe?
100%. Oh, and that's what I was going to go back to when you were saying people who are super into movies and have no interest in making them. And that's what I really think of as like being like a movie nerd, because I move out here, and obviously anyone who wants to make movies does so because they love movies. I'm not trying to say these people are all phonies, but there is different levels of nerddom. I mean, Tarantino being a classic example of anytime he makes a movie with someone, in all the press interviews, they're always like, Quentin knows every movie ever made, and Scorsese, another one. But yeah, that even out in the industry, it's like, you reset. We're all movie nerds, but then even in that microcosm, there's still the super movie nerds, and some of the biggest movie nerds I've ever met. In fact, I'd say most of the biggest movie nerds I've ever met don't work in the industry. They're just some person with a normal job who's just obsessed with the movies and owns 500 Blu-rays that I'm sure their spouse wishes they didn't have up on the walls.
I know a guy that he goes to like 4 screenings a day, and he has this notebook, and he writes down like what screening it is, what theater it is, but then also like what seat he's sitting in.
That's
and
amazing.
Then how he feels about it. And sometimes he can track, like, if I sit in this certain seat, I'm going to feel a certain way about the movie.
Wow.
And so he then picks like a favorite seat, basically, for the best experience for him. So that's like the king of it. But Quentin, one of the reasons why Quentin is so like prolific at like remembering everything is because he writes it all down, and because he didn't have the internet. And now it's like you can just get on your phone and jump on Letterboxd. Like, it's like, oh, who directed this? It's like you don't have to use your recall anymore, which I think is kind of a dangerous thing.
I mean, I was a little bit bummed when everyone got on the IMDb, because in high school, my cat's clawing the stairs. Mitzi, knock it off. In high school, I would have friends call me to ask me, because they were talking to their parents or another friend about a movie, and there was no way for them to look it up.
Phone a friend, literally.
And so they're like, wait, who made that? Or what's this guy? Or what was that movie? And they'd call me and ask me. And then I noticed over time with the rise of the internet and that stopped happening. No one calls me now because they don't need to.
Oh, maybe I will. Maybe I'll start calling you instead of doing I've thanks to like video archives, I've started writing down all my notes. Like, when I see a movie, like if it's at home and I'm doing it for work, I'll typically I'll type them up and then I'll handwrite them afterwards. It's helped my recall so much.
My wife has a notebook that she writes stuff down in while we're watching.
Yeah, it honestly helps when I have like film students ask me, like, what's like the one thing I can do to like do it? I'm like, write it down, like read it. Don't just like use your phone all the time to like look up stuff. Mm-hmm. But so do you think that like the internet has made it easier for people to like find their tribe?
Oh yeah, for sure. Which is, I think it's a good thing, because I think all those people we were talking about who weren't going to move to LA or New York because they wanted to make movies, and they're just living in middle America doing whatever
in
career
like
thing.
Kentucky, or like I'm a
but
pharmacist,
they're just obsessed with movies. And I know what it felt like to reach that point where I burnt out even my other like movie fan friends. That I think that was kind of what caused the rise of Ain't It Cool and Dark Horizons and all those sites in the late 90s, that then they really blew up because they started getting scoops on movies and the industry started paying attention. But before that, I think it was just all these movie nerds all across the globe finding each other and be like, holy shit, somebody else wants to talk about Rolling Thunder all night or whatever.
It's funny. It's like, because it is true. Like Letterboxd like really helped me find a lot of my movie friends, even the LA ones. Like I didn't know them, and then they contacted me like through Letterboxd has no contact system, but they found me and they're like, oh, like you have because I have a very small film club before COVID or during COVID, and they're like, oh, you have a movie club, like let me join. And now I actually have Los Angeles movie friends thanks to the internet.
Yeah.
You'd think that I would have them because of work. No, I have them thanks to the internet.
But that's exactly what I sort of hinted at. For me, was moving out here, and obviously compared to growing up in Bloomington, Minnesota, moving out here, everyone I was meeting was a movie nerd.
Yeah.
But then I remember there was a point where I was going to the New Bev, and it would always happen that I'd tell my friends something was playing, or they'd tell me, and we'd go see a movie. And then while there, I'd be looking at the calendar and say like, oh, this is showing on Thursday. And then my friends would be like, well, but we just went here. And at some point I was like, oh, I see.
Oh, that's the kind of movie nerd you are.
So then I started going by myself. And it's so funny what the New Bev is like now. Like, for example, I had a friend just today. We were talking about Winter Kills before we started recording. And he's like, do you want to see Winter Kills tonight? And I'm like, I assume that's sold out. And he's like, why would it be sold out? They showed it for 3 nights. And I'm like, I don't know. I feel like you're not paying attention to the New Bev these days.
Yeah, the first night was definitely sold out. I'm not sure.
Tonight is also sold out.
Tonight's also sold out? Okay, yeah, because...
It's become very popular.
That's what happened with Sorcerer, because they played that 4-track mag audio Sorcerer print for like 5 nights, and everyone's like, don't worry about it. It won't be sold out. They're playing it for 5 nights. It was sold out. I kept telling people, you should get a ticket. It's going to sell out. They're like, why would Wednesday sell out? I'm like...
Every time I'm there now, it's either sold out or very full, which is funny because I was saying that I started going there by myself, which started to become a little discouraging because there'd be like me and 10 other people who also all came by themselves. And I just kind of look around and thinking like, I don't know, is this the trajectory of my life? So then I started going to a now defunct place that got basically Me Too'd. It was called Cinefamily. Did you ever go there?
I never went, but I know about it.
And it was great at first. I'd say it rightfully got canceled. But at first it was awesome because I started going there, and unlike the New Bev, again, at the time, now the New Bev is completely different. At the time, when I would go to Cinefamily, there was all these other young people there and, big groups of people, and they were showing essentially the same kind of stuff because only so much a rep cinema can really do to make itself distinct. But so I was like, I'm just going to, and that was the birth of my Friday Night Fright show.
Yeah.
I was like, I just want to like hang out here and start showing movies, because that was another thing I missed from being back home where I lived with my parents because I was child, but that my house was the movie house because I was the movie guy.
Yeah, our house,
and
was
we
also
had the
movie
best
house.
like basement for watching movies. And we had a ritual where every Tuesday our video stores would have like 2-for-1 Tuesdays. So in the summer we'd rent 4 horror movies and watch them all in one night in my basement. And and then I move out here and I'm living in a studio apartment that I can barely fit in. So I'm like, well, I'm not inviting over everybody I know. And also, I moved out here. I didn't have as many friends initially. Yeah. I think when I moved out here, my writing partner and I only had one person we knew who was also living out here. So kind of joining a movie theater gang was awesome, because I was like, well, anytime I want to go see what they're showing, now I know the people who work there.
Yeah.
So they're going to be there, because I didn't know any of the employees at the New Beverly.
Yeah. For me, it's like the places I go now, I go to the Bev, obviously. I'm there, like, I feel like I'm there and I'm like, hey, do you guys want to see this? And my friends are like, oh, we've already been here, Gala. And then the LF3. That's like my other screening place. And I like to sit not in the very back, but in like that back row in the middle, because I can hear the projector if I sit in the right seat. It's really cool. I like that. I'm a little weird like that, though. But yeah, I don't know. It's just being a movie person, though. You definitely find like the different movie people and the different movie crowds. And it sounds like, though, also like you have like very specific genres that you were interested in, like as a kid, like horror.
Well, that was the thing, is obviously at some point early on, I realized, oh, I like movies more than the average person. So then I think, the way friendships always shake out is I became closest to the friends who also loved watching movies. And I had friends who loved watching horror movies. Like I said, we'd rent 4 horror movies in one night. But then at some point, even with that, I'd realize those friends would start like, well, I'm kind of getting sick of watching horror movies. We should watch some other genres. And I'm like, no! I mean, I like all genres, but...
Did you ever work at a video store?
Oh, yes.
Which video store did you work at?
I worked at called Video Update that was in Bloomington, Minnesota.
Yeah, so like when you were there, like what would you like push horror movies on other people? Like, hey, like you should watch this, or
kind of that video store. And again, that's what I was kind of trying to say is we had some fun mom and pop stores. That was a chain, but that like a very small chain,
like a local chain. Kind
of?
It
was definitely a well, it might have been like Midwest local. I don't think it was just Minnesota, but. And sometimes people would ask for recommendations, and some stores would have the employee picks. But for the most part, I feel like that wasn't the culture. Like, I don't even know that the customers necessarily thought to ask, or, they'd ask the most rudimentary thing of just like, is this good? Or how long is this? And you'd be like, it says on the box, but
it says approximately 90 minutes.
Yeah. But it definitely didn't have that kind of, I associate more with bigger cities.
With the bigger cities, yeah. So, okay, I'm just going to make the assumption that you were the weird kid because I was the weird kid. And like when I talked to Eli, because he kind of talked about this too, like finding your tribe is like one of the most important things you can do. And it is easier with the internet now, but there are like a lot of people struggling out there, I think, to make connections and to find the right people. Do you have advice for like young adults / teens that are struggling to find their people?
I mean, it's tough advice because the best advice is just putting yourself out there. But I get that for some people that's easier said than done, or it makes them anxious. I do think the internet's a great tool that I certainly didn't have growing up. I guess I got lucky that even though I was a weird kid, funny thing is, I don't even consider myself an extrovert, and I often really enjoy being by myself.
Oh, I do. I'm an introvert for sure. I know that sounds weird, but
I think because I always liked doing theater and making my movies, and you make a movie and you kind of want to show them to people. And my friends and I had a cable access show in high school. So in that sense, I was always letting my freak flag fly.
And I think that's the most important thing. Like, people just need to continue to be themselves. And I have a cat on me right now. I'm literally in heaven, you guys. I have a cat on me.
But I mean, like I said, when I started going to the silent movie theater, because I was basically just like, I want to be friends with these people because they're here every night, and these will be my movie watching friends in a sense. And that's what's great about the internet is that's not an actual physical place you need to go to. But it's also, I was just having a conversation on my podcast about this with a guy who started a now kind of forgotten website called chud.com. Mm-hmm. But they were one of, like, along with Dark Horizons and Ain't It Cool, were one of the original kind of big movie sites in the 90s. And they were popular because they had a message board, like a very active.
I miss forum boards so much. Yeah. I grew up in like the forum board.
And that's what I was going to say. That doesn't really exist anymore.
Oh my God. Reddit is like the closest thing you get, and it's not close at all.
No, not at all.
Forum boards were just so much better than chat rooms, which were even so much better than like Discord, because we stream for my film club on Discord. We use Discord, and then there's also another website we use called Trast. But no, I miss forum boards. They were better.
And I know a lot of people, early adopters of Twitter, miss the kind of
Wild West,
the halcyon days of Twitter with film Twitter started. But yeah, those message boards were great because they were very focused, and I'm sure they were ugly in their own ways.
But they're so beautiful. I'm so nostalgic for that ugly, like, Y2K forum
I
board.
don't mean visually. I meant ugly, like meeting bad, toxic people. But I think much less so than the current equivalents, because I think those sites were kind of killed by the combo of social media for the easy discourse, and then podcasts, I think, kind of replaced where people used to go on Ain't It Cool to read in-depth film analysis. Now you listen to podcasts that do a similar thing. It's just it's a different era now.
Yeah, I mean, I could totally agree with that. I think also, like, with the forum board, it was kind of more anonymous, and like social media kind of brought everyone's faces to the forefront.
It's true.
And it's just like how they always say, like, video killed the radio star. I think, like, it's like all those things just kind of kill each other. And it's like when you were anonymous on a forum board, especially like a film board, you could kind of just like have your opinion, and no one like knew who you were. So you could just say whatever you wanted, and there was no repercussion. And now,
do you think that like the Discord for your podcast is sort of a place that, well, thankfully these people could meet?
Thankfully, we don't have a Discord for the video archives. That my little film club, we were.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
No.
I misunderstood.
No. Oh God, okay. In another lifetime, I administrated a 4,000 person Discord server for a YouTuber friend of mine. That was like a full-time job. I never want to do that again, to be honest. It was miserable. But I do have like a very small film club. We were public for a while, and it is how I met my friends. They found my Discord on my Letterboxd, and then I found out some of them lived in Los Angeles. And so now we actually go see movies together at the Bev, which is really nice. And we do have like meetups. Like one of them's from San Diego, someone's from Denver. We have members in India. So it's really cool. When it was public, yeah, I guess people could have come together and found each other. It's private now. I closed it. I'm like, we have like a perfect like member base of like 70 people. They all somehow get along. No one hates each other. I want to keep it that way. But there's definitely like Discord for young people. Like you can go on there and find big, large film clubs, and there are people that just love like all different kinds of movies, and people that share all kinds of movies. I know someone that looks up like Lost Cinema and is able to find movies that have been lost, and then he torrents them for people to enjoy. But yeah, I mean, the internet helps, but I think it's better in person.
Well, and we were talking about it earlier. Now, I mean, it's all the pop-up. I feel like every city now, anytime you go somewhere bar, you'll like look and you'll be like, oh, they have like a movie night.
Yeah.
Where they just put up a screen even if it looks like a horrible venue. That's kind of, sometimes that's the charming way.
Yeah. I think like if I had any advice for someone, if you're like under 18, just keep being yourself.
Yeah.
And, like just be true to yourself. And then if you're over 18, start going to all these events and just start like, if you start going a lot, people will notice you, and then people will approach you even if you don't approach them. So that would be my advice.
Especially, and I think a lot of these pop-ups, because one of the reasons I switched over from the new Bev to the silent movie theater at the time, not just because hardly anyone was going to the new Bev, but even though people
that was a long time ago, just to like preface for everyone when you switched over.
This was like 2009.
Yeah, that was something. Like ye old days of the Bev.
Very old days. And they have people will stand under the marquee and kind of gab. But you're also like out on the street, where the silent movie theater, I should hype them now. A new company's running them called Brain Dead, and they've remodeled. And the best thing about the venue is that they have a back patio
with a little restaurant.
And now they have a restaurant at Brain Dead. But it encourages people to hang out and talk to each other.
Yeah, like after the Bev, I have like 2 or 3 places that I go. Toy, but Toy's not open until 4 a.m. anymore.
What?
No, it closes at midnight, which is like really upsetting. So I used to go with my dad after the Cinerama Dome. But like, yeah, there's like a few like restaurants like the LF3. You can go to Fred's 62s afterwards, or you can go to like, the House of Pies.
Or Ye Rustic.
Ye Rustic, Ye Old. There's also like a karaoke bar down the street that we go to sometimes after. It's like a Thai food karaoke place. Okay. But No, that is the one good thing about Brain Dead is it like encourages conversation after the movie or before.
Yeah.
Sometimes I go there before.
I'm excited that the Egyptian will be reopening, and I know
Is that owned by Netflix now?
it is,
That'll be
unfortunately.
interesting. That'll be
But
interesting.
I mean, even though they got rid of the balcony, which I loved, but I get that they were trying to restore it to its original version, and I think they built the balcony in the 90s or something. But that was my favorite spot to sit. But I'm pretty sure that part of the remodel of that, because Netflix wants to be able to do their premieres there, so I think they want a little bit more of a communal lobby space, and I'm curious what that'll be like.
That's really interesting. They want a communal lobby space for their movies that have like
Yes.
no space. They're just like
The irony.
the irony of it. But yeah, I mean, we grew up fine. So I
Yeah.
think it's like, there you go. And do you like living out here in LA better than Minneapolis? Like, do you ever miss?
Oh, yeah. My original plan was always to go back.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, I love Minneapolis and Minnesota in general. And the funny thing is, the thing I thought I would miss the most was
Oh,
the rep theaters. But as we were saying, now they're everywhere.
now they're everywhere.
But now I've been in LA for too long. I feel I've
now you're
got my
from here.
roots.
LA.
Yeah.
LA has adopted you. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. Josh, is there any final thought that you want to share with the audience?
find your tribe.
Do
Get
it.
out there. Yeah, because it's like I didn't have a lot of older people to turn me on to movies, so I think that makes me very interested in trying to spread the love of the movies I like. Point being, it's a circle of life, and I think that's part of the way you can find a tribe is just tell people about the cool stuff you find.
If you could tell people to watch one movie, like right now, if there was a cool stuff that you found, what would you tell them?
Well, we're talking about Phantom of the Paradise before.
Yeah.
That's the first to come to mind.
You better, if you haven't watched Phantom of the Paradise, what are you doing
It's a
listening
good
right
gateway drug movie.
now? That is right. So that is it for today. Thank you so much to my lovely guest,
Thank
Josh
you.
Miller. You can find Josh on Instagram at Josh_S_Miller and on Twitter, or X as they now call it, at Josh Miller Light. That's Josh Miller, Lite. Be sure to check out his podcast, Best Movies Never Made, and watch those Sonic movies if you haven't, because I tell every single person I know to do that. They are literally, they brought me so much joy during those years. So
Oh, thank you.
I'm Gala Avery, and this has been The Gala Show. The Gala Show is brought to you by the Video Archives Podcast Network. This episode was executive produced by Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avery, and produced by Gala Avery. Music composed by Andy Milburn. As always, I'm your host, Gala Avery. Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.